Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're finally going to be talking about the debut album from AURORA, All My Demons Greeting Me as a Friend. You ever have one of those artists where you get a glimpse of the cover art and read up on some of the buzz or the reviews, and before you hear a second of their music, you immediately have an impression or an expectation of what they might sound like? Oh, don't act like I'm the only one who does this, or it's not a very human reaction, especially if that artist exists in modern pop music and you know that genre. Like it or not, unless you are on the avant-garde or the sort of artists who break genre with every single album, and let's be fair here, those artists do exist in modern pop music, like say Panic at the Disco, most modern pop eventually falls along the line of a trend. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Just because something is trendy doesn't automatically make it bad, but it can be a bit predictable. And this is where, as a music critic, that can get a little complicated, as we're used to seeing trends come in, go out, and we're not always grabbed by the presumption of novelty. So when I hear buzz suggesting a new mainstream accessible artist is changing the sound or is so revolutionary, I'm very quick to be skeptical because I've seen and heard this before, more than ever in the age of the internet. But the key thing to note is that audiences, particularly younger audiences, don't always have that frame of reference, and that can be fine if the audience is willing to trace the artistic lineage of the music and find out more. And what frustrates me is when that really doesn't happen. When people praise Kanye West as a revolutionary after Yeezus while dismissing Death Grips, for a very easy example. But look, my overall point is that when I first started hearing the buzz behind AURORA, a Norwegian pop singer-songwriter, I had the sinking feeling that I knew exactly what I was going to be getting. Oh great, another vaguely foreign indie pop star who's just weird enough to appear outside the mainstream while fitting very much within it, in terms of subject matter that is so deep, but never really goes beyond some basic pop platitudes. I think I've gone down this road before, that's all I'm saying. But that said, AURORA didn't seem like the sort of studio creation disguising itself as indie pop that you occasionally see, and with the main writing credits on every single song, she could very well be a distinctive voice. So I decided to take up all your requests and dig into All My Demons Greeting Me as a Friend by AURORA. What'd I get? Well, you know, it's funny. Throughout the first 5 to 6 listens throughout this album, I was immediately inclined to pitch this record in the same category that I've deposited so much modern indie pop. Muted synths, monochromatic, percussion over melody, and far more bleak than it can believably pull off. In other words, over the past few years, I've seen a lot of this. And yet, I'm inclined to be a little bit more charitable here, mostly because if you go a little deeper, AURORA seems a little bit more transgressive and self-aware than most of her peers. And she seems smart enough to frame her material as the darker melodrama that it is at its best. Now, does this mean this album is good? Definitely debatable. While it has more good moments than bad, I'm doubtful it's going to stick with me for long in face of stronger pop competition like Fox's. But I do think AURORA is carving out a niche for herself, one that might not be unique in historical context, but it's got its merits. It's good, not great, but decent enough. So let's start off with the element that I definitely like most about this album. AURORA's vocals. I won't say she comes across as a real strident force behind the microphone, but there's enough of a folk-inspired, ethereal lilt to keep in her voice that keep me interested. And the fact that she often chooses some interesting vocal progressions is probably the biggest factor to keeping this album interesting. What I liked a lot more were the vocal arrangements themselves. And really, if we're looking for what anchors the majority of any sort of melody on this album, it would come through here. Songs like Home and Through the Eyes of a Child would not work without the good harmonies that they have. And the majority of the swell that tracks like Warrior or Under the Water comes through in that vocals. Of course, Warrior suffers the problem of a very similar vocal line to what Kesha put out in a song with the exact same name in 2012, and I've got the same problem with both songs that's a larger issue across this album. The warbling in her voice can get kinda grating, especially on hooks that are otherwise pretty bare bones. I get trying to sound otherworldly, but really it just makes more of these choruses sound kind of underwritten. But then again, you could make that point about the majority of the production on this album too. Easily the part of this album that works for me the least. And again, I get the appeal of the sound, and points are given to AURORA to leaning into that dark, kind of creepy vibe that comes with the muted keyboards and brittle plucked strings and the popping beats. But let's get real here. There's nowhere near enough texture in any of the direction to really suck me in, most courtesy of a selection of desaturated synths that don't remotely fit with more of this atmosphere. Take Running with the Wolves. I like the breezier backing effects against the damp plucked progression, but when everything piles in for the chorus, it completely lacks the organic, wild bite you need to make a song like this more believable. It does get a little bit better on the final 2 tracks, with Under the Water getting some thunderous royal behind it, with the shimmering cascades of chimes on Black Water Lilies, but there's very little distinctive instrumentation instrumental melody to really support the vocals and stick in the brain the same way. The hooks just aren't there, and that's a real consistent problem across the board on this album. Yeah, the drums on Conqueror and Warrior have some punch. I like the more frigid atmosphere on Winter Bird, but that instrumental melody to back up the vocals, it's so perfunctory that I can't see either song really sticking with me, especially when the atmosphere isn't anything like a dozen other artists like Elvira or Chelsea Wolfe, or even Christina Perri in this space who could do with more texture or impact. And that's not even opened up to when you have symphonic metal acts like Nightwish, who have used this naturalistic sound and kind of that vibe with more diverse textures and instrumentation, and just works so much more for me. The best song on this album by a mile is Murder Song 54321, a track about a mercy killing that's easily the darkest thing here, but also has the most prominent melodic hook. I might not have loved the clipped, buzzing synth that flooded in through the chorus, but it at least managed to capture the unhinged vibe of the song and shows that Aurora what she could do if she really wanted to get transgressive and get dark. I like that song. Now this takes us to lyrics and themes, and really, I wish I could say that the writing was anywhere near as dark or truly edgy as Murder Song 54321, but the reality is that outside of some above average symbolism, a lot of this album falls into an odd gray zone for me. Clearly, Aurora is going for a darker take on the self-actualized coming out of depression story, and I'll give her points for avoiding the obvious and overdone self-esteem anthems that become an unfortunate hallmark of this kind of pop music. Oh, they're still here, but Aurora's at least aware you have to go through the darkness to get to the dawn, and tracks like Lucky, the frigid and very haunted song Winter Bird, especially the two ending tracks, they do emphasize this, and it's telling how they're sequenced. One of the running themes seems to be Aurora returning to the home, a womb-like environment where she could find sanctuary in her own childhood. Hell, it's one of the reasons why Warrior felt so unconvincing as an anthem, because even though she's got the sword, she's still building the cage to hide in. But when we get to the end of this album, we see the turbulent seas and Aurora wondering why anyone would go into that murky blackness, only for her to do just that on the final song to come out reborn all the stronger. And sure, that's a decent arc, but it does feel a little bit scattershot across this record. It also features the worst song, I Went Too Far. Well, self-awareness that her desperate clinginess probably drove this guy away doesn't exactly redeem you when you end up chasing another soul to fill that hole. Yeah, I get the intention was that she was filling it in with her own soul, but the words and delivery don't quite fill in that subtext gap. And really, that vagueness is probably the writing's biggest problem on this album. Not having much detail to inform that subtext. You get what she's going for, but it doesn't really connect all the dots. Feels the album feeling a little bit underwritten to me and emptier than it really should, especially with some of the very, very bland hooks. And you know, to Aurora's credit, if she's indeed writing about coming through depression into the light, as songs like Home and Lucky definitely imply, then I can see that artistic parallel. But it comes through only in patches in the instrumentation, production, and writing, and certainly not enough to really stand out for me. The artist that Aurora reminds me most of is Christina Perri. And while Aurora has more subtlety, she can't quite pull off the bombast in the same way, which you get the feeling she's trying to do with some of the thicker synths that she brings in. And either way, this album can often support the drama or melodrama that it's trying to pull off. Again, Murder Song 54321, great track, and it's just enough to pull this record up to a very light 6 out of 10, along with the acknowledgement that if you're in the target audience, you'll probably find a lot more to like than I did. But for me, it's a decent debut that needed a little bit more personality to really stick the landing, especially in the instrumentation. It's promising, I'll probably check out more from her, but it definitely could have been better. At least for me. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here, so everyone who wants to tell me that I'm so wrong and this album is awesome, there's your opportunity. I'm curious what you think. But beyond that, if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.